The question that followed me. Have you ever been so tired of trying that even a simple question feels heavy? Not a big dramatic question. Just a quiet one that keeps tapping your shoulder when the room goes silent. For me, that question was this: is love really a choice, or is it just something lucky people get? I didn't hear it in a movie or read it in a book. I heard it in my own head, late at night, while living and working in the United States, far from everything that once felt familiar. When I first arrived in America, people told me I was lucky. New country. New chances. Better future. And on the surface, they were right. The streets were wide. The sky felt bigger. The seasons were clear and dramatic: hot summers, sharp winters, long highways cutting through quiet towns. But what no one tells you is that a new life doesn't start with excitement. It starts with confusion. Your body is in one place, but your mind is still catching up. English surrounded me everywhere. On signs. On the radio. In grocery stores. At work. People spoke fast, confidently, like words were weightless. I had studied English before, of course. Grammar books. Vocabulary lists. Listening exercises. But standing there, nodding politely while not fully understanding, I realized something uncomfortable. English wasn't the hardest part. Feeling unseen was. At work, I learned to smile before I learned to speak. A short hi. A careful thank you. A nervous laugh when I wasn't sure what someone meant. My brain was constantly working overtime, translating, guessing, filling in gaps. By the end of the day, I wasn't just physically tired. I was emotionally drained. And that's when the question started to follow me. You see, loneliness doesn't arrive loudly. It shows up quietly, like background noise you don't notice until everything else stops. It comes when you want to explain your thoughts but don't have the words. When you miss home but can't describe how you miss it. When you realize that understanding instructions is easy compared to understanding people. Psychologists say the human brain is wired for connection. We don't just need food and shelter, we need to be understood. When that need isn't met, the brain goes into a kind of low-energy mode. Motivation drops. Confidence shrinks. Learning becomes harder. That's one reason so many people give up on practicing English, not because they're lazy, but because their nervous system is overwhelmed. I felt that. Deeply. Some days, I questioned everything. Why am I here? Why am I trying so hard? Why does everyone else seem to adapt faster than me? And then life, in its strange timing, added another layer to the story. Love. Not the movie kind. No dramatic music. No perfect conversations. Just a person entering my life while my English was still broken and my emotions were even messier. Conversations were slow. Sometimes awkward. Sometimes funny in ways we didn't plan. I searched for words. I simplified sentences. I listened more than I spoke. In a strange way, that slowness created honesty. There was no space for fancy language. Only meaning. That's when the question changed shape. It wasn't just can I survive here? It became can I choose to stay present, even when it's uncomfortable? Love, I started to notice, wasn't something that magically removed difficulty. It actually revealed it. Living in the U.S. teaches you independence quickly. Everyone is busy. Everyone is moving. The culture values self-reliance, efficiency, forward motion. That can be empowering. But it can also make you feel like you're falling behind if you slow down. Learning English slowly. Building a relationship slowly. Understanding a new culture slowly. None of that fits neatly into a fast-paced world. There's a concept in behavioral science called decision fatigue. When you have to make too many choices in unfamiliar conditions, your brain gets tired and starts choosing the easiest option, often quitting. Giving up feels like relief. And I was close to that edge more than once. Not just with English. With love. With the whole idea of building a life here. But here's the quiet truth I didn't realize at the time. Every day I stayed, I was already choosing. Choosing to listen again. Choosing to try again. Choosing to misunderstand and not run away. Choosing to learn one simple sentence instead of 10 perfect ones. Those choices didn't feel heroic. They felt small. Almost invisible. That's the part people rarely talk about. Big changes don't start with confidence. They start with tolerance. Tolerance for discomfort. For silence. For not being good yet. When you train your ear with real conversations, when you let yourself speak imperfect English in real life, you're not just learning a language. You're teaching your brain that it's safe to try. Looking back, I see that question wasn't chasing me to scare me. It was guiding me. Is love a choice? In America, surrounded by a new language, a new culture, and a new version of myself, I began to understand something simple and powerful. Love isn't the absence of difficulty. It's the decision to stay engaged when difficulty shows up. And maybe that's why this story matters for you, too. Because if you're listening right now, learning English through a real story, feeling tired or stuck or unsure, you're already at the same starting point I was. Not with answers. Just with a question. What will you choose today? America looked perfect from far away. From far away, America looks clean. Bright. Organized. Like a well-edited photo with good lighting and no noise. Before I came here, that's the version I carried in my head. Wide opportunities. Clear rules. A place where effort equals reward. Maybe you've seen the same picture. And maybe, like me, you believed that once you arrived, motivation would magically turn on, English would start flowing. And life would finally feel stable. Reality, of course, had other plans. The first thing that surprised me wasn't the language. It was the silence. Not the peaceful kind. The emotional kind. In many American cities, people respect personal space deeply. They don't ask too many questions. They don't dig into your life unless invited. At first, that feels polite. Later, it feels lonely. Back home, connection happened naturally. Here, connection is intentional. And if you don't know the cultural signals yet, you can go days without a real conversation. Climate plays its own quiet role. Winters feel longer when you don't belong yet. Cold doesn't just live outside, it creeps into your mood. Shorter days mean less sunlight, and science tells us that reduced sunlight can lower serotonin levels, affecting motivation and emotional balance. You feel slower, heavier. Learning anything new, especially a language, feels twice as hard when your body is still adjusting. At work, I noticed something else. Americans value clarity and confidence. Even when they're wrong, they speak like they're right. I, on the other hand, spoke carefully. Softly. I paused to think. I searched for words. Sometimes that made people impatient. Not unkind, just fast. Speed is rewarded here. And when you're slow English, slow reactions, slow cultural understanding, you start to feel invisible. This is where many learners quietly quit. Not officially. They still watch videos. Still save vocabulary lists. But inside, something shuts down. Psychologists call this learned helplessness. When repeated effort doesn't bring immediate results, the brain decides it's safer to stop trying. Motivation disappears, not because you're weak, but because your brain is trying to protect you from disappointment. I felt that happening to me. Every small task required energy. Ordering food. Answering emails. Understanding jokes I didn't fully catch. Even casual small talk felt like a test I didn't study for. At the end of the day, I didn't feel proud for surviving. I felt empty. That's when America stopped looking perfect and started looking demanding. And yet, something interesting happened. When everything feels heavy, you start noticing details. The way seasons change differently in different states. How people greet you more warmly in smaller towns. How strangers can be distant one moment and surprisingly kind the next. America isn't one culture. It's many climates, many rhythms, many unwritten rules stacked on top of each other. Love entered this stage quietly, almost accidentally. Not as an escape, but as a mirror. Conversations were simple. Sometimes repetitive. How was your day? Busy. Tired. Short sentences. Easy words. But beneath them were emotions I couldn't hide. Frustration. Hope. Confusion. Care. Here's the strange part, because my English wasn't perfect, I listened more. Really listened. Tone. Pauses. Facial expressions. Research shows that when verbal language is limited, humans naturally develop stronger nonverbal awareness. I was training my ears and my intuition at the same time, without realizing it. America taught me that perfection is admired, but effort is respected. When people saw me trying to explain, trying to understand, trying to stay, they softened. Not everyone, but enough. And that mattered. Cultural expectations around relationships added another layer. In the U.S., independence is emphasized, even in love. People expect you to manage your emotions, your career, your growth. That can feel cold if you come from a culture where emotional support is more collective. At first, I thought something was wrong. With me. With us. With love itself. But slowly, I began to understand, love here isn't loud. It's practical. It shows up in actions, schedules, choices. And that realization connected back to the question that started following me. Is love a choice? In a country where no one forces you to stay, at a job, in a relationship, in a conversation, staying becomes meaningful. Learning English the slow way. Building connection the slow way. Choosing to explain instead of withdrawing. Choosing to ask instead of assuming. These are not dramatic moments. They're daily decisions. Motivation didn't return all at once. It came in small doses. One clear conversation. One kind response. One day where I understood more than I expected. Neuroscience tells us that small wins release dopamine, reinforcing behavior. That's why simple, real-life English practice works better than pressure-filled study sessions. Your brain learns to associate English with progress, not pain. America stopped being a picture and became a process. Messy. Uneven. Human. And love, in that process, wasn't something that saved me from difficulty. It walked with me through it. If you're watching this and feeling disappointed because your life here, or your English, doesn't look like the image you imagined, that doesn't mean you failed. It means you've reached the part where real growth begins. The moment when perfection fades and choice takes over. America may look perfect from far away. But meaning is built up close, one decision at a time. When English was not the hardest part. Have you ever practiced English for months, even years, and still felt stuck, not because of grammar, but because something inside you quietly refused to open? That was my reality in the United States. I thought English was my biggest enemy. Vocabulary. Pronunciation. Listening speed. But one day, standing in a break room, smiling again while not fully understanding a joke, I realized something uncomfortable. English wasn't the hardest part. Trust was. Trusting myself to speak. Trusting others to be patient. Trusting that being imperfect wouldn't make me invisible. At work, I could complete tasks. I could follow instructions. But conversations were different. Small talk moved fast, like a river you're expected to jump into without checking the temperature. My brain froze, not because I didn't know the words, but because I didn't want to make a mistake. Psychologists call this language anxiety, and it's powerful. When your brain senses social risk, it shifts resources from learning to protection. In simple terms, fear makes you forget what you already know. That fear didn't just live in my mouth. It lived in my shoulders, my breathing, my silence. I spoke less, not because I had nothing to say, but because saying it felt dangerous. And the less I spoke, the more distant I felt from people around me. Loneliness grew, not from isolation, but from self-censorship. This is where many English learners misunderstand the problem. They think, if I just learn more words, I'll feel confident. But confidence doesn't come from knowledge alone. It comes from safety. The brain needs to feel safe to experiment, to sound silly, to try again. Without that, even advanced learners shut down. In relationships, this became painfully clear. When emotions entered the room, English suddenly felt very small. Explaining feelings requires nuance, timing, softness. I didn't always have those tools. Sometimes I stayed quiet. Sometimes I simplified too much. I'm fine. It's okay. Short sentences that hid complex emotions. Over time, that created distance, not because of a lack of love, but because of a lack of shared understanding. Cultural differences made it trickier. In American culture, directness is often valued. Say what you feel. Be clear. Be honest. But honesty in a second language feels risky. You worry about sounding rude, dramatic, or wrong. So you delay. You edit. You swallow words. And those unspoken thoughts don't disappear. They turn into tension. Science backs this up. Emotional suppression increases stress and reduces cognitive flexibility. In plain language, holding things in makes your brain worse at learning. No wonder English felt heavier when life felt heavier. The turning point wasn't a textbook or a new study method. It was a moment of exhaustion. I was tired of translating feelings in my head and never releasing them. So I tried something different. I chose clarity over perfection. I said things simply. Slowly. Sometimes awkwardly. I feel confused. I need time. I don't understand. Can you explain again? And something surprising happened. People didn't judge me. Most leaned in. They slowed down. They explained. Some even thanked me for being honest. That's when I learned a quiet lesson. Vulnerability, even in broken English, builds connection faster than fluency without emotion. This changed how I practiced English. I stopped chasing perfect sentences and started practicing real ones. The kind used in real life. The kind that carry feelings. Research shows that contextual learning, language tied to personal experience, activates deeper memory pathways. Your brain remembers what matters to you. Love, in this phase, became less romantic and more intentional. Choosing to speak when it felt uncomfortable. Choosing to listen without preparing my response. Choosing to stay in the conversation, even when it was slow. These choices didn't remove misunderstandings, but they made repair possible. Working in the U.S. also taught me something important. Many native speakers don't communicate perfectly either. They interrupt. They miss cues. They misunderstand emails. Fluency doesn't equal clarity. That realization took pressure off my shoulders. I wasn't behind. I was human. Gradually, English stopped feeling like a test and started feeling like a tool. Not a weapon to judge myself with, but a bridge. A bridge built with simple words, patience, and repetition. Train your ears like a native, not by forcing speed, but by allowing rhythm. Real conversations have pauses. Real understanding takes time. Motivation returned quietly. Not as excitement, but as steadiness. I noticed I was less afraid to speak. Less afraid to be wrong. Neuroscience explains this through exposure and positive reinforcement. Each safe interaction retrains the brain. English no longer signals danger. It signals possibility. Looking back, I see that the hardest part was never English itself. It was believing that I deserved to be heard before I was fluent. That I could choose connection before confidence. That love, like language, grows through use, not waiting. If you're listening and thinking, I know the words, but I still feel blocked, you're not broken. You're protecting yourself. And that protection once had a purpose. But maybe today, you can choose something slightly different. One honest sentence. One small risk. One real moment. Because when English stops being the hardest part, everything else becomes learnable. Working, surviving, smiling anyway. Imagine waking up before your alarm, not because you're motivated, but because your brain is already rehearsing the day in English. Simple phrases. Possible questions. Worst-case misunderstandings. That was my morning routine in the United States. Before coffee. Before hope. Just quiet mental preparation. Not to succeed, just to survive. Work is where English stops being theoretical. No subtitles. No rewind button. Real consequences. You misunderstand, you slow things down. You speak too carefully, you sound unsure. You stay silent, you disappear. At first, I thought survival meant pushing harder, studying more, memorizing more, forcing fluency. But work taught me something different. Survival meant adapting. I learned quickly that American workplaces don't just value skill. They value communication. Clear updates. Direct questions. Timely responses. None of that waits for perfect grammar. And that realization was terrifying. Because if English was still shaky, what was I supposed to rely on? So I relied on effort. I listened more than I spoke. Not passively, actively. I trained my ears on real English, the kind people actually use at work. Short sentences. Repeated phrases. Casual corrections. Research in applied linguistics shows that repeated exposure to functional language in real contexts builds comprehension faster than isolated study. My job became my classroom, whether I liked it or not. Some days were rough. I nodded when I shouldn't have. I misunderstood jokes and realized it too late. I answered emails twice as long as necessary because I was afraid of sounding rude or unclear. By the end of the day, my face hurt from smiling. Smiling became my safety net. A social signal that said, I'm trying. Please be patient. There's a psychological concept called emotional labor, the effort it takes to manage emotions in social environments. Immigrants do a lot of it. We regulate confusion, hide frustration, translate ourselves constantly. That's exhausting. And when you're exhausted, learning slows down. That's why many people feel like their English gets worse at work, not better. But here's the unexpected part. Pressure, when paired with support, creates growth. Over time, patterns emerged. The same questions. The same instructions. The same small talk. My brain started predicting instead of panicking. Predictive processing is how native speakers understand fast speech. They anticipate meaning before it's fully spoken. I wasn't fluent yet, but I was adapting. Love watched this process from the sidelines at first. Quiet encouragement. Simple check-ins. How was work? Some days I said, fine. Other days, I said nothing. Work stress followed me home, but I didn't always have the language to unpack it. Instead, I carried it silently. That silence can be dangerous. Not loud, not dramatic, just heavy. One evening, after a long shift, I admitted something small but honest. I'm tired of pretending I understand everything. The sentence wasn't elegant, but it was real. And that moment mattered. Because survival isn't just about enduring external pressure. It's about allowing internal truth. Working in America also taught me cultural efficiency. Meetings move fast. Feedback is direct. Time is treated like currency. At first, that felt cold. Later, I saw the benefit. Clear expectations reduce anxiety. Once I understood the structure, English felt less chaotic. I knew when to speak, when to ask, when to listen. From a neuroscience perspective, structure reduces cognitive load. When the brain isn't busy guessing rules, it has more energy to process language. That's why real-world routines, work schedules, repeated tasks, are powerful for language learners. You're not just practicing English. You're stabilizing your nervous system. I stopped trying to sound smart. I aimed to sound clear. Simple words. Calm tone. Honest questions. Can you repeat that? Can you show me? These phrases became survival tools. And surprisingly, they built respect. People trust clarity more than complexity. Slowly, English stopped feeling like an enemy at work. It became a tool. Imperfect, but useful. I wasn't fluent, but I was functional. And functionality builds confidence. Confidence builds willingness. Willingness builds growth. Love entered the work story more deeply then. Not as rescue, but as reflection. When I came home tired but proud, it showed. When I came home defeated, it showed too. We learned to navigate that rhythm together. No grand speeches. Just presence. Choice. This is where the title of this story quietly comes alive. I learned love is a choice. Not a feeling you wait for after success. A decision you make while you're still struggling. While English is still slow. while work still drains you. Choosing to stay open instead of shutting down. If you're learning English through real life, through work, pressure, responsibility, and you feel like you're just surviving, hear this clearly. Survival is not failure. It's training. Your ears are learning. Your brain is adapting. Your confidence is being built quietly, beneath the surface. One day, you'll notice something small. You'll understand without translating. You'll respond without rehearsing. You'll smile because you want to, not because you're hiding. That's when you realize survival has turned into progress. And progress, like love, begins with a choice to keep showing up. Love arrived without translation. Love didn't arrive with a clear sentence. It didn't knock and say, "Hello, I'm here to change your life." It arrived the way most real things do, but quietly, awkwardly, without instructions. At that point, my English was still careful and controlled, like walking on ice you're not sure will hold. And yet, somehow, love stepped onto that ice with me. We didn't start with deep conversations. We started with basics. Weather. Work. Food. How was your day? Questions simple enough to answer, but heavy enough to mean something. My sentences were short. Sometimes broken. Sometimes repeated. But they were honest. And honesty, I learned, doesn't need advanced vocabulary. What surprised me most was how much love depended on listening. Not the kind of listening you practice in language exams, where you wait for keywords. Real listening. Tone. Timing. Silence. Research in communication psychology shows that emotional understanding is often carried more by how something is said than by the words themselves. That helped me more than any grammar rule. Because I didn't have the words to impress, I had to be present. I watched reactions. I noticed pauses. I learned when to stop talking. That slowness, which once felt like a weakness, became an advantage. Conversations slowed down. Meaning deepened. There was space to breathe. But don't romanticize it too much. There were misunderstandings. Plenty of them. Jokes that fell flat. Comments that sounded colder than I meant. Moments when I wanted to explain myself fully but couldn't find the language fast enough. Those moments hurt, not because of English, but because of fear. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being too much. Fear of not being enough. This is where many people expect love to fix things. To smooth the edges. To make learning easier. But love doesn't remove difficulty. It exposes it. In a second language, every emotion feels louder because you don't have as many words to soften it. You can't hide behind eloquence. You show up as you are. And that's uncomfortable. There's a concept in neuroscience called emotional transparency. When you lack linguistic complexity, your emotions become more visible. Your face, your tone, your timing carry the message. That transparency can feel risky, but it also builds trust. People sense when you're real. I noticed that the more I tried to sound correct, the more distant I felt. But when I spoke simply, I'm confused, I'm tired, I care, connection happened. Not perfectly, but genuinely. Love also taught me patience in a new way. Not waiting for fluency. Not waiting for the perfect moment. Just staying in the conversation. Staying in the discomfort. Choosing to clarify instead of retreat. Choosing to ask instead of assume. These are skills, not feelings. And like any skill, they improve with practice. In American culture, relationships often move through clear stages. Dating. Defining. Planning. But when language lags behind emotion, those stages blur. You feel deeply before you can explain deeply. That mismatch creates tension. I felt it. We felt it. And sometimes, it felt easier to stay quiet than to risk saying the wrong thing. But silence, I learned, is also a choice. And not always a helpful one. There was a moment, a small one, but important, when I realized love wasn't asking me to be fluent. It was asking me to be available. Available to listen. Available to explain badly and try again. Available to choose connection even when my English made me feel small. From a learning perspective, this was powerful. Language acquisition research shows that emotional engagement accelerates retention. When English is tied to real feelings, care, frustration, affection, the brain prioritizes it. Words stick because they matter. Love became a context. A living classroom. I started noticing phrases repeating in emotional moments. Apologies. Appreciation. Boundaries. These weren't textbook sentences. They were survival sentences. And because they were used often, they became natural. My ear trained itself without pressure. My mouth followed slowly. Love, in this phase, wasn't dramatic. It was practical. Showing up after work. Sharing space. Learning each other's rhythms. And every day, without realizing it, I was answering the question that started this journey. Is love a choice? Yes. Especially when it's inconvenient. Especially when it's slow. Especially when you don't have the words. If you're learning English and you feel like your emotions are ahead of your language, that doesn't mean you're behind. It means you're human. Many people wait to feel ready before they speak honestly. But readiness is often built through action, not before it. The biggest lesson from this part of my story is simple. Love doesn't require perfect English. It requires presence. And presence is something you can choose today. Right now. With the words you already have. Because love didn't arrive with translation. It arrived with willingness. And that willingness changed everything. Marriage tested by culture and climate. Marriage doesn't announce when the test begins. There's no countdown, no warning sound. One day you just realize that love, which once felt light, now has weight. In the United States, that weight came from places I didn't expect: culture, climate, and the quiet pressure to be okay all the time. Before marriage, differences feel interesting. After marriage, they feel structural. Who speaks first during conflict? How silence is interpreted. What support looks like after a long day. In my culture, love often shows up through presence, through shared time, through reading emotions without words. In American culture, love often shows up through clarity, independence, and personal boundaries. Neither is wrong. But when they collide, friction happens. Add language to that mix, and suddenly every disagreement feels bigger. There were moments when I wanted to explain myself fully but couldn't. Not because I didn't understand my feelings, but because translating them into English felt like trying to carry water with open hands. Words leaked. Meaning slipped. What came out sounded colder than what I felt. That gap, between intention and expression, is dangerous in marriage. Climate made it worse. Cold seasons keep people indoors. Days get shorter. Sunlight disappears early. Science tells us that reduced daylight affects mood and emotional regulation. Seasonal stress doesn't cause problems, but it amplifies them. Small misunderstandings feel heavier. Patience runs thinner. And when your emotional battery is low, communication becomes harder, especially in a second language. In American society, marriage also lives under a quiet expectation: be functional. Be stable. Handle your issues privately. That pressure can make couples avoid honest conversations. I felt it. The desire to appear fine. To not be that couple. But avoidance doesn't protect love. It delays repair. There was a period when conversations turned practical and nothing else. Bills. Schedules. Responsibilities. Necessary, but empty. Emotional topics felt risky. We both knew something was off, but naming it required language, vulnerability, and timing. All three were in short supply. Psychology explains this through attachment stress. When people feel emotionally disconnected but still care, the nervous system stays activated. You're not fighting, but you're not relaxed either. That tension makes listening harder. It makes learning, yes, even learning English, slower. I noticed my English slipping again during this time. Not in vocabulary, but in confidence. I hesitated more. I replayed conversations in my head. I avoided deeper topics because I didn't trust my words. Marriage didn't break me, but it exposed my weak spots. The turning point wasn't a big argument. It was a quiet realization. Waiting to feel understood wasn't working. I had to choose to understand first. That meant asking simple questions instead of making silent assumptions. What do you need right now? Did I misunderstand? Can we slow this down? These sentences weren't perfect, but they created space. American culture values directness for a reason. Clear questions reduce emotional guessing. Once I stopped trying to protect my pride and focused on clarity, things shifted. Not overnight. Gradually. Conversations became less about winning and more about aligning. Marriage taught me that love doesn't survive on shared feelings alone. It survives on shared skills. Communication. repair, patience. These are learned behaviors. And learning them in English forced me to be intentional. I couldn't rely on emotional shortcuts. I had to be explicit. From a language learning perspective, this was powerful. Emotional conversations repeated key phrases again and again. Apologies, clarifications, appreciation. These became automatic. My listening improved because it mattered. My speaking improved because silence had consequences. Climate changed too. Seasons passed. We adapted. Winter felt less isolating when we learned how to sit with discomfort together. Summer felt lighter because unresolved tension wasn't hiding beneath the surface. Marriage didn't remove challenges. It taught us how to face them without running. This is where the message of this story deepens. I learned love is a choice. Not the dramatic kind. The daily kind. Choosing to speak even when it's hard. Choosing to listen when you'd rather defend. Choosing to stay engaged when misunderstanding feels safer. If you're married, or hoping to be, and learning English at the same time, know this: difficulty doesn't mean failure. It means you're at the learning edge. Where growth happens. Where habits form. Where real connection is built. Marriage in a second language strips things down. No fancy speeches. No emotional shortcuts. Just truth, effort, and repetition. And that's enough. Because love isn't proven by how smoothly things go. It's proven by how often you choose to repair. To clarify. To stay. And in a country that teaches independence, choosing together is a powerful act. The day I almost gave up. There's a moment no one prepares you for, the moment when quitting feels calm. Not dramatic. Not angry. Just quiet relief. That was the day I almost gave up. Not on America exactly. Not on marriage exactly. But on the effort of holding everything together in a language that still felt borrowed. It wasn't one big failure that pushed me there. It was accumulation. Small misunderstandings stacked on long days. Work stress leaking into home. Conversations that ended with "it's fine," even when it wasn't. English didn't disappear from my life, but it became heavy again. Each sentence felt like a responsibility. Each explanation felt like work. Psychologists call this ego depletion. When you spend too much energy regulating yourself, your tone, your words, your reactions, you eventually run out. And when that happens, the brain looks for escape. Not solutions. Escape. For me, that escape was the fantasy of stopping. Stopping the effort. Stopping the explanations. Stopping the constant choosing. That day, the climate matched my mood. Gray sky. Cold air. The kind of weather that makes everything feel slower and harder. Seasonal affective patterns don't cause decisions, but they shape them. Reduced light lowers energy, patience, and emotional flexibility. Science explains it. Living it feels different. At work, I misunderstood a simple instruction and had to ask again. Nothing serious. But inside, something cracked. The old thought returned, why is this still so hard? At home, a small disagreement turned quiet instead of resolved. Not because we didn't care. Because we were tired. That's the dangerous part of this stage. When caring turns into silence. I remember sitting alone, replaying everything. My brain did what tired brains do best, it generalized. If English is still hard, maybe it always will be. If love feels heavy, maybe it's wrong. Cognitive science calls this catastrophic thinking. One bad day becomes a permanent future in your mind. And here's the truth most people don't say out loud, quitting doesn't feel like failure at first. It feels like rest. The idea of not trying anymore felt peaceful. No more proving. No more choosing. Just letting things be. But something stopped me. Not motivation. Not inspiration. Awareness. I noticed that giving up wasn't really about English or marriage. It was about exhaustion without recovery. I had been pushing without refueling. Learning without compassion. Loving without rest. And the brain, when deprived long enough, will choose numbness over pain. That realization mattered. Instead of making a big decision, I made a small one. I didn't quit. I paused. I said, out loud, in simple English, I'm not okay today. Not a speech. Just a sentence. That sentence changed the temperature of the room. Neuroscience tells us that naming emotions reduces their intensity. It activates the prefrontal cortex and calms the stress response. In real-life terms, saying how you feel, imperfectly, is better than carrying it silently. Especially in a second language. That day didn't turn into a breakthrough. It turned into a breath. I allowed myself to stop performing. To stop smiling automatically. To stop pretending I had answers. And something unexpected happened. Connection returned. Not because problems vanished, but because honesty entered the space. This was also a turning point in how I practiced English. I stopped treating every conversation like a test. I focused on function, not form. Meaning, not elegance. Research on language acquisition confirms this. Learners progress faster when communication goals replace accuracy goals. Your brain learns when it feels purpose, not pressure. Love, at that point, became less emotional and more intentional. Choosing to stay present on bad days. Choosing to repair instead of withdraw. Choosing to rest instead of run. That's not romantic. It's real. The idea that love should always feel good is one of the biggest myths we carry. Love, like language learning, includes plateaus. Flat periods. Times when effort doesn't show results. Those are not signs to quit. They're signs to adjust. If you're listening and you're in that quiet quitting phase, where you haven't stopped, but you've emotionally stepped back, I see you. That place is heavy because it's invisible. No one claps when you keep going. No one notices when you almost give up but don't. Here's what helped me step back from the edge. I remembered that choice doesn't have to be permanent. You don't have to decide forever. You just decide today. Today, I won't quit. Today, I'll speak one honest sentence. Today, I'll rest without disappearing. That's it. The day I almost gave up didn't end my story. It clarified it. It showed me that endurance without kindness leads to collapse, but endurance with awareness leads to growth. And if love is a choice, then so is staying curious instead of numb. Speaking instead of shutting down. Trying again, not perfectly, just honestly. Sometimes, the bravest choice is not dramatic persistence. It's gentle continuation. Choosing to stay and learn. There's a quiet shift that happens after you almost give up. Not a surge of motivation. Not a sudden plan. Just a small decision that feels oddly heavy. I'll stay. Not forever. Just today. That decision marked the beginning of a different kind of learning for me, one that wasn't about English first, but about choice. Up until then, I believed feelings should lead actions. If I felt confident, I would speak. If I felt motivated, I would practice. If love felt easy, I would stay open. But life in the United States taught me a humbling lesson. Feelings are unreliable guides when you're tired, overwhelmed, or living in a second language. Actions, on the other hand, can create feelings. So I flipped the order. I chose to stay engaged even when I felt flat. I chose to practice English slowly, in real moments, without waiting for confidence to arrive first. This wasn't discipline in the harsh sense. It was commitment in the gentle sense. The kind that says, I don't need to feel ready to show up. Neuroscience supports this. Action precedes motivation more often than the other way around. When you take small, intentional actions, your brain updates its expectations. Dopamine isn't released by success alone, it's released by progress. Even tiny progress. That changed everything. Instead of setting big goals though of fluency, perfect communication, emotional clarity, I chose small, repeatable behaviors. One real conversation a day. One honest sentence, even if it sounded simple. One moment of listening without planning my response. These choices were manageable. And because they were manageable, they were sustainable. Love shifted during this phase too. It stopped being something I evaluated based on how it made me feel and became something I practiced. Staying present during dull moments. Responding instead of retreating. Clarifying instead of assuming. Choosing repair over silence. In American culture, choice is often associated with freedom. You can leave. You can change. You can start over. That freedom is real. But it comes with a hidden cost. When leaving is always an option, staying requires intention. And intention is work. Learning English through this lens became surprisingly effective. I wasn't studying for approval. I was learning for connection. Words learned in emotional contexts stuck better. Phrases repeated during real conversations became automatic. My ear trained itself on meaning, not perfection. There's a concept in cognitive psychology called desirable difficulty. Learning improves when it's challenging but meaningful. Real conversations are exactly that. They're messy, unpredictable, emotionally loaded. And that's why they work. I stopped correcting myself mid-sentence. I let grammar mistakes pass if the message landed. I noticed that native speakers do this too. Communication isn't clean. It's collaborative. Meaning is built together. Choosing to stay also meant choosing patience with myself. Not lowering standards, but adjusting expectations. Growth isn't linear. Some days English flowed. Some days it didn't. Some days love felt warm. Some days it felt like effort. None of that meant I was moving backward. This phase taught me something subtle but powerful. Staying doesn't trap you. It teaches you. When you stay long enough, patterns emerge. Triggers become familiar. Needs become clearer. Skills develop quietly. Working in the U.S. Navigating marriage, adapting to culture, all of it became less threatening when I stopped asking, do I feel like doing this? And started asking, is this aligned with the life I'm building? That question reframes everything. For English learners, this matters deeply. Waiting to feel confident before speaking is like waiting to feel strong before lifting anything. Strength comes from the lift. Confidence comes from the attempt. Love, in this stage, wasn't romanticized. It was grounded. Choosing to learn how the other person processes stress. Choosing to explain instead of explode. Choosing to listen even when I thought I already knew the answer. These choices weren't exciting. They were stabilizing. And stability is underrated. I noticed my nervous system calming. Fewer spikes of anxiety before conversations. Less mental rehearsal. More presence. Science tells us that predictability reduces stress responses. By choosing consistent actions, I gave my brain a sense of safety. And a safe brain learns faster. If you're practicing English through real stories like this one, here's the part I want you to hear clearly. You don't need to fall in love with the process. You just need to choose it consistently. Motivation will catch up later. Choosing to stay doesn't mean you never change direction. It means you don't let discomfort make decisions for you. It means you give yourself time to adapt, to learn, to grow into the person this life requires. That's the real lesson hidden inside this chapter of my story. Love didn't suddenly feel easier. English didn't suddenly become fluent. But I became steadier. And steadiness changes outcomes. So if today feels ordinary, slow, or unremarkable, that might be a good sign. It means you're no longer running on adrenaline. You're building something real. And real things are built by choice, not by mood. English became a bridge. At some point, without any announcement, English stopped standing between me and life. It didn't disappear. It didn't suddenly become perfect. It simply changed roles. Instead of a wall, it became a bridge. And like most bridges, it wasn't beautiful at first, but it was functional, and that made all the difference. Before this phase, every conversation felt like a risk assessment. Do I know enough words? Will I sound strange? What if I misunderstand something important? My brain treated English like a test I could fail at any moment. That mindset keeps your nervous system on high alert, and a stressed brain doesn't connect well with anyone. But after choosing to stay and learn, slowly, consistently, something softened. I noticed I wasn't translating every sentence anymore. I was listening for meaning. I responded before fully rehearsing. Sometimes I was wrong. And the world didn't end. That's when English quietly became useful. In daily life in the United States, usefulness matters more than elegance. At work, clarity builds trust. At home, honesty builds safety. In relationships, timing and tone matter more than grammar. Once I accepted that, my English had a purpose beyond correctness. It became a tool for connection. This shift aligns with what linguists call communicative competence. It's not about knowing everything, it's about knowing enough to navigate real situations. When your goal is understanding, not performance, your brain relaxes. And relaxed brains learn faster. Love benefited immediately. Conversations that once felt tense became collaborative. Instead of struggling alone to express myself, I invited help. I'm not sure how to say this, but that sentence alone changed the energy of many discussions. It signaled effort, not weakness. In American culture, direct communication is often appreciated. People respect transparency. When I stopped hiding behind silence and started naming my limits, misunderstandings decreased. Not vanished, decreased. That's progress. English became the bridge during conflict, too. Disagreements didn't disappear, but they became navigable. We clarified intentions. We slowed down when emotions rose. We checked understanding instead of assuming. These are relationship skills, yes, but they're also language skills. From a neuroscience standpoint, this makes sense. Emotional conversations activate memory more strongly than neutral ones. The words you use during meaningful moments are stored more deeply. That's why English learned through real relationships sticks longer than English learned through drills. I also noticed something surprising. My accent didn't fade, but my fear of it did. I realized that accents are not obstacles, they're signals of effort. In the U.S., accents are everywhere. They tell stories. Once I stopped trying to erase mine, I spoke more freely. Fluency improved not because I sounded native, but because I sounded confident enough to continue. This phase taught me the power of repetition without boredom. The same phrases appeared again and again in life. Appreciation, clarification, planning, repair. These phrases became automatic. Not memorized, lived. Love, in this stage, felt more stable. Not exciting every day. Stable. We weren't constantly decoding each other anymore. English carried meaning instead of blocking it. That stability created space for growth in other areas, career decisions, family conversations, future plans. Working in the U.S., I felt the bridge effect too. Colleagues included me more. Not because my English was perfect, but because I participated. Participation invites inclusion. Silence invites assumptions. Once I crossed that bridge myself, others met me halfway. There's a psychological principle called self-efficacy, the belief that you can handle challenges. It grows through experience, not encouragement. Every successful interaction, no matter how small, strengthened that belief. English stopped being something that happened to me and became something I used with people. This is why real English story practice works. When language is tied to life, work, love, decisions, it stops being abstract. It becomes embodied. You don't just know words. You feel when to use them. If you're listening and thinking, I still hesitate, that's okay. Bridges are crossed one step at a time. The goal isn't speed. It's direction. Are you moving toward connection or away from it? Love helped me choose toward. Every time I spoke instead of shutting down, every time I clarified instead of assuming, I reinforced the bridge. And bridges get stronger the more they're used. I want to be clear about something important. This stage wasn't the end. English didn't solve everything. Love didn't become effortless. But life became navigable. And that's a huge shift. When English becomes a bridge, you stop asking, am I good enough yet? And start asking, what do I want to say? That question changes your posture, your breath, your presence. So if your English feels fragile right now, remember this, bridges don't need to be perfect. They need to hold weight. Start with simple words. Honest intentions. Willingness to try again. Because when language connects instead of divides, love has room to breathe. And when love breathes, life expands. When English became part of who I am. There was a quiet moment when I realized English was no longer something I used. It was something I inhabited. Not completely, not perfectly, but naturally. It showed up in my thoughts, my reactions, my sense of self. English had stopped being a skill and started becoming part of who I am. This didn't happen suddenly. It happened gradually, invisibly, the way habits turn into identity. One day you notice you're thinking in English without trying. Another day you feel emotions arise in English first. That's when language crosses a deep psychological line. Before this stage, English was external. I reached for it. I prepared it. I evaluated it. My relationship with the language was transactional. But now, it was internal. It moved with me. It shaped how I processed experience, especially in the United States, where language and identity are tightly linked. Identity isn't just about where you're from. It's about how you participate in the world around you. Language is the medium of that participation. Once English became familiar enough, I stopped seeing myself as someone who speaks English and started seeing myself as someone who lives in English too. That distinction matters. Research in second language acquisition shows that advanced learners often struggle not with vocabulary or grammar, but with identity integration. They ask questions like, is this really me speaking? Do I sound like myself? Those questions don't come from weakness. They come from depth. In this stage, I wasn't trying to sound American. I was trying to sound authentic in English. That meant accepting moments of awkwardness, pauses, and emotional honesty. I learned that authenticity travels across languages better than perfection ever could. Love deepened here. Conversations weren't just functional anymore, they were reflective. We talked about values, fears, long-term plans. These topics require nuance. They require emotional precision. And English, surprisingly, was capable of carrying that weight. I learned how certain emotions felt different in English. Some words were softer. Some were sharper. Some allowed distance when I needed safety. Others invited closeness. Language didn't just express emotion, it shaped it. This stage also changed how I saw my past. I started retelling my own story in English, not for practice, but for meaning. When you narrate your life in another language, you gain perspective. You see patterns. You reinterpret pain. You choose which details matter. That's powerful. In daily American life, this integration showed up in small ways. Jokes landed. Cultural references made sense. Silence felt comfortable instead of threatening. I wasn't decoding anymore, I was responding. That's when belonging begins. Belonging doesn't mean blending in. It means feeling legitimate. I didn't feel like a guest anymore. I felt like a participant. English gave me access not just to communication, but to contribution. Work changed too. I stopped holding back ideas because of language. I shared them anyway. Sometimes clumsily. Often effectively. People responded to clarity of thought more than polish of language. Confidence, I learned, is contagious. There's a concept in psychology called bicultural identity integration. It refers to the ability to hold more than one cultural framework without conflict. Language is a core part of that. I didn't lose my first language. I gained a second lens. That lens helped me navigate American norms, directness, optimism, speed, without losing myself. I learned when to adapt and when to stay grounded. English didn't erase my identity, it expanded it. At this stage, mistakes felt different. They weren't embarrassing. They were informative. When something didn't land, I adjusted. When something resonated, I remembered it. Learning became self-directed, organic, ongoing. Listening changed too. I heard tone beneath words. I caught subtext. I understood humor layered with irony. These aren't textbook skills. They're lived skills. If you're listening to this and wondering when English will feel like yours, know this: ownership doesn't come from mastery. It comes from use in meaningful moments. From telling your truth, even imperfectly. From staying present instead of performing. English became part of who I am because I allowed it to enter my life, not just my study routine. I let it witness my mistakes, my love, my uncertainty. And in return, it gave me voice. This stage isn't an endpoint. Identity evolves. Language evolves with it. But once English becomes internal, it stops draining energy. It starts giving it back. You don't have to wait until you're fluent to feel this. You just have to let English be human with you. Messy. Emotional. Real. Because when a language becomes part of who you are, it no longer asks for permission. It walks with you. And that's when learning turns into living. Love is a daily decision. There is a quiet truth I learned much later than I expected. Love is not a feeling you find once and keep forever. Love is a decision you make again and again, especially on ordinary days, especially when no one is watching. This realization didn't come during a dramatic argument or a turning point. It came on a normal weekday in the United States. The kind of day that looks small from the outside. Work, traffic, tired bodies, unfinished conversations. Nothing special. And yet, everything important was there. That morning, we didn't wake up inspired. We woke up responsible. Life in America has a way of speeding things up. Bills arrive on time. Schedules don't wait. Work demands consistency, not emotion. In that environment, love doesn't announce itself loudly. It shows up quietly, disguised as effort. That's where many relationships struggle, not because of a lack of love, but because of a misunderstanding of what love actually is. For a long time, I believed love should feel obvious. Warm. Effortless. Like certainty. But marriage taught me something deeper. Love often feels like choice. And choice requires intention. There were days when we misunderstood each other, not because we didn't care, but because we were tired. Days when silence felt safer than explanation. Days when cultural differences resurfaced in unexpected ways. None of these moments meant love was gone. They meant love needed to be chosen consciously. In the U.S., individualism is strong. Personal happiness is emphasized. Do what feels right is a common message. But long-term love doesn't always feel right in the moment. Sometimes it feels inconvenient. Sometimes it asks for patience when you want clarity, or humility when you want to be right. Choosing love means staying present during those moments. I learned that love isn't proven in big declarations. It's proven in repetition. In showing up when motivation is low. In listening when your mind is elsewhere. In staying curious about someone you think you already know. This is where many people quietly give up, not because the relationship is broken, but because the story they believed about love no longer fits reality. In marriage, especially across cultures, love requires translation, not just of language, but of expectations. What feels caring to one person may feel distant to another. What feels respectful may feel cold. These gaps aren't failures. They're invitations to learn. Choosing love meant choosing to interpret generously. It meant assuming good intent instead of jumping to defense. That didn't come naturally. It came through practice. There were moments when English became the language of problem solving. Not poetic, not emotional, just clear. We learned to say things like, "I need time," or "This matters to me," without accusation. Simple sentences. Honest tone. That clarity saved us more than perfect phrasing ever could. But language alone didn't hold us together. Commitment did. Commitment is often misunderstood as obligation. But real commitment is freedom with direction. It's the freedom to leave, combined with the decision to stay. Every day. In American culture, choice is sacred. And that's exactly why love as a choice is powerful here. Staying isn't automatic. It's intentional. It's renewed daily. I began to see love less as an emotion and more as a practice. Like any practice, some days are easier than others. Some days feel rewarding. Others feel routine. But consistency creates depth. Over time, something shifted. The pressure to feel in love faded. In its place grew trust. Stability. A sense of we that didn't depend on mood. That kind of love isn't exciting in a cinematic way, but it's grounding. It's resilient. This perspective also changed how I saw myself. Choosing love required me to grow, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. I had to learn how to pause instead of react. How to listen without planning my response. How to apologize without explaining it away. Those skills didn't just improve my marriage. They changed how I moved through the world. In daily American life, at work, in conversations, in conflict, I became more intentional. Less reactive. More aware that every interaction is a choice. Not just romantic ones. That's the deeper message here. Love as a choice extends beyond marriage. It applies to family. To friendships. To how you treat yourself when life feels heavy. If you're listening to this while learning English, or while navigating life in the United States, know this. You don't have to feel confident every day. You don't have to feel inspired every day. You just have to choose how you show up. Choosing love doesn't mean ignoring problems. It means believing they're worth facing together. Looking back, the strongest moments in my relationship weren't the happiest ones. They were the moments when staying required intention. When walking away would have been easier, but less true to who I wanted to be. Love didn't save us from difficulty. It taught us how to move through it. And that's why love is a daily decision. Not because it's fragile, but because it's alive. Every morning, you wake up with a choice. To withdraw or to engage. To assume or to ask. To protect yourself or to open just a little more. Love grows in those small choices. Quietly. Persistently. So if today feels ordinary, or tiring, or unclear, good. That's where real love lives. And tomorrow, when you wake up again, the choice will still be there. Waiting. What will you choose today? There is a moment at the end of every long journey when the road doesn't disappear, it simply becomes quieter. No applause. No clear finish line. Just a sense that you are still walking, but differently than before. This is that moment. When I look back on my life in the United States, the moves, the work, the marriage, the misunderstandings, the growth, I don't see one dramatic turning point. I see thousands of small decisions. Most of them invisible. Most of them ordinary. And yet, every one of them mattered. Living and working in America taught me something subtle but powerful. Life doesn't change because of what you feel. It changes because of what you choose. There were days when I felt confident. Many when I didn't. Days when love felt easy. Others when it felt heavy. Days when English flowed naturally. Others when silence felt safer. None of those feelings defined the outcome. The choices did. That's the message I want to leave you with, not as advice, but as an invitation. Because if you're listening to this, you are already on your own journey. Maybe you're learning English. Maybe you're building a life far from where you started. Maybe you're in a relationship that feels uncertain, or a season that feels slow. Whatever brought you here, you're not here by accident. Stories matter because they help us name what we're already living. I used to think my story was about immigration, or language, or marriage. But now I see it more clearly. It's about agency. About realizing that even when you can't control the situation, you can still choose how you respond to it. In the U.S., choice is everywhere. What to pursue. What to leave behind. What to believe about success, happiness, love. That freedom can be overwhelming. It can make you feel like every wrong step is permanent. But it can also be empowering, if you understand that choice doesn't require certainty. It requires honesty. One of the hardest lessons I learned is that you don't choose once. You choose repeatedly. You choose to stay curious instead of defensive. You choose to listen instead of assuming. You choose to try again instead of checking out. These choices don't always feel heroic. Most of the time, they feel quiet. Almost boring. But over time, they shape who you become. Love, in particular, reveals this truth. Love isn't sustained by intensity. It's sustained by alignment between values and actions. You don't wake up every day feeling the same, but you can wake up every day deciding who you want to be in the relationship. The same is true for language. The same is true for life. English didn't become part of me because I mastered it. It became part of me because I kept choosing to engage, even when it felt uncomfortable. Even when I sounded imperfect. Even when I wasn't sure I belonged. Belonging, I learned, isn't something you wait for. It's something you build, choice by choice. If you're watching this channel for real English stories, know this, the real lesson isn't in the words. It's in the willingness to keep showing up. To keep listening. To keep choosing connection over isolation. You don't have to be fearless. You don't have to be fluent. You don't have to have everything figured out. You just have to decide what matters to you today. Maybe today you choose patience, with yourself or someone else. Maybe today you choose honesty instead of avoidance. Maybe today you choose to stay, even when leaving would be easier. Or maybe today you choose to let go of something that no longer aligns with who you are becoming. All of those are valid. All of those are powerful. Life in America taught me that no one is coming to choose for you. Not your partner. Not your job. Not your circumstances. Choice is the quiet responsibility we all carry. And that's not a burden. It's a gift. Because every morning, no matter where you are in your story, the question resets. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just patiently. What will you choose today? Will you choose love even when it asks for effort? Will you choose growth even when it feels slow? Will you choose to believe that small steps still move you forward? This story doesn't end here. It continues with you. If something in this journey resonated, let it stay with you, not as motivation, but as permission. Permission to move at your own pace. Permission to choose again tomorrow. Because love is a choice. Life is a choice. And today, quietly, steadily, you get to choose. Thank you for walking this far with me. If this story stayed with you longer than you expected, that's not an accident. It means part of you recognized yourself somewhere in it. In the quiet choices, the slow progress. The moments when giving up felt easier than continuing. This channel isn't about perfect English. It's about real life, real emotions, and real choices, told in clear, natural English you can actually feel. Every story here is a safe space to train your ears like a native, build confidence step by step. And remember that learning English and life doesn't have to be rushed to be powerful. If you're tired of fast, noisy content. If you want English that grows with you, not over you. If you believe stories can heal, teach, and quietly change the way you see yourself, then you're in the right place. Subscribe to this channel to continue your journey with real English stories about love, life, marriage, culture, and starting over in the United States. Like this video if it helped you feel understood. Comment below and tell me, what will you choose today? More stories are coming. More honest conversations. More English you don't just learn, but live. This isn't the end. It's the beginning of a better way to learn English, through story, emotion, and choice. Stay with the channel. Your next chapter starts here.